Thanks for listening to the Music Production Podcast. I want to tell you about my new Ableton Live pack called 16-Bit, and you're listening to it right now. It's a collection of Ableton Live instrument racks made from samples of the Sega Genesis YM2612FM synth sound chip. So using a special MIDI interface called Gen MDM, I loaded sounds from some of my favorite games and sampled them and made instruments out of them that you can use in Ableton Live. It's a really cool way to get a very nostalgic sound from one of the coolest sound chips of the 16-bit era and the chiptune era in general, in my opinion. The 16-bit Ableton Live pack is available to members of the Music Production Club during September 2020. So if you join the club during September 2020, you will get 16-bit Ableton Live pack and have these sounds for your music. And you'll continue to get downloads and resources and live classes online every single month. Check it out at brianfunk.com/MPC. How's it going, everybody, and welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. On today's show, I have Colin O'Donohoe, who is a composer, musician, producer. He does a lot of different kind of work. He's working with instruments and musicians from all over the world in all kinds of genres and styles. And I really actually enjoyed a lot of the instruments that you're using, too, are just a little more exotic, I guess, for Westerners like me. And also work with film and television. So I'm very excited to talk to you about this quite wide and diverse background of yours. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's really great to be here, and I'm super happy to be speaking with you.
Yeah, me too. I was wondering if maybe you can just start off telling us in general, like what you're doing these days and any highlights along the way.
Okay, sure. So first, the artist name that's out there mostly is World Maestro, and yes, my name's Colin O'Donohoe, and the tracks on any streaming platform you'll find would be under Colin O'Donohoe. But I kind of got the title of World Maestro because I had formed these two large-scale orchestras, and the orchestra was, the founding principle was to bring in any instrument from around the world, and let's find a way to get all these instruments in one room, working together, talking to each other, and then get one sound. Because as an orchestra, you want to sound like one ensemble. You don't want to sound like one group of 40 individuals, right? So in a normal orchestra that your listeners are accustomed to, everyone already knows where their place is. It's been set for a few hundred years now. You know where the bassoon goes, you know where this goes, and that's fine. In these new ensembles that I've been creating, it's about figuring out how the instrumentalists can work best with each other, how the sound projects best when you're out in the hall, because if you're pairing things like a ukulele with trumpet and tuba and drum set and other things, then a plucked string like a ukulele or a pipa or a yangqin is going to have no chance. Mm-hmm. So there's ways of working as an ensemble to get an ensemble sound, and maybe the person in the audience can't pick out that zither or that instrument, but as an ensemble, you've got a sound, and that's what you're after. So when you're joining a group like the Pangean Orchestra is the orchestra I lead now, and in the Pangean Orchestra, the idea is we're all coming together, we're going to share our traditions and what works best for us when we're playing in our own niche atmosphere, whether that's in a meyhane in Turkey, and you're playing music that's typically played while people drink rakı, and you're there that way, or you're in a concert hall, you're playing classical Indian music, and there's certain rules there. And we kind of have to first understand each other, and then we understand, okay, this is what you like, this is what I like. How are we going to not completely lose our identity, but how can we work together to make a better identity for the whole ensemble? So that's the challenge in terms of, you're a mixer, you're an engineer, you do the same thing in the studio where you've got great players and great sounds that are working together, but how do you get that band sound for the track? How do you get that sound overall? And it's not just about a great singer, it's not just about a cool drum groove, it's about how all those elements work together to give the listener something that, oh yeah, I've got to put this on my playlist. I've got to remember to listen to this more. It's awesome. And you want that experience for your listener. And the same thing when you're performing, you want the people to just feel it like, oh yes, this is the sound. You're after that end product. And the end product, as you know, working in a studio forever and teaching Ableton, that to get that end product, you have to nitpick. You have to trim a little here. You have to automate this up a little here. You have to bump that guy. You've got to put these in a bus over here. And that's how you work it on your end. And as a conductor up on stage, it's like, oh, well, in this passage, we're going to have these guys really come out. Or maybe we need to enhance the plex strings with a microphone that's going to be in the main overheads that will help that section blend with an electric guitar. So those are the challenges, but there's a lot of similarity between what I'm doing up on a stage and what an engineer that would have 40 tracks, when we did our first Pangean Orchestra demo, I guess, our recordings, my friend and I, a very good engineer, we opened up the track and it had 72 tracks of instruments, and we're thinking, oh man, it's a challenge to mush that down into one sound. Sometimes too much can be too much.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So anyway, so my work started with the Pangean Orchestra, and I've always been really interested and curious about sounds and about instruments, and also respecting not just the sound, because today with the VSTs you can get stellar, impeccable sounding instruments from Iran or any country, anywhere. You can get the sound, but if you have never heard a person play that, then you don't know how it works. You don't know what it should do, should in quotes, versus what you want it to do. You're a Western producer, so you want a Western sound, but that instrument never really did that. So sometimes it becomes a little bit of exploiting the sound to get a new sound so you sound cool. And I don't mean you personally, I just mean the general you. And so when I use instruments, I want to know the masters of that instrument. I want to go deep and listen to the tracks and find friends that can tell me, oh, this is the master of this. Oh, you have to listen to this one. And I'll check them out and I'll watch and see what they're doing first before I add it in to my sound. And I just have started a project called The Prayer Garden. And we had our first release yesterday. And The Prayer Garden is a project where, like you, we were talking earlier about your lighting. And during COVID, I wanted to create, because I like to travel. And I've been traveling around the world the last couple of years, playing with awesome musicians in Mongolia and Brazil and Turkey. And I'm just really lucky. And now I'm at home. And so what can I do? So I created my own space. Lighting was really important. I wanted to make this beautiful blue, calm thing to provide not only myself, but anyone that's interested in the project with a peaceful refuge. We're bombarded with all these external bad news. Oh, this just happened. Now this just happened. Oh, you thought it couldn't get worse. Oh, now this. And it's just every second there's so much negative. Oh, this. So why not create a space where we can just return to ourselves, return to what makes us human, return to a peaceful state? And so it started with me personally needing that, but then as a performer, I want to give what I'm doing to others. So with The Prayer Garden, it started out as this live ambient track, and I would just use tonal centers, similar to how in Indian music and in Middle Eastern music they'll use ragas and maqams, which are similar to a scale, but they have some rules as well as the scale. And what I did with Prayer Garden is I would start with one tonal center, then move to another tonal center, and then one more. And so naturally it just kind of blends from one thing to the next. And from the listener's perspective, they can meditate, they can relax, and trust that the musicians and sounds are going to lead them, in some places, and they can free their mind, they can exercise, they can stretch, they can clear their mind, and just feel good. So that was the idea behind that project. And for that one, I needed to really dig into my own audio engineering skill set, which I really got from working for television for 10 years. I've been composing music for television shows, and in the television shows, they have a very specific list of requirements of how the sound should be, what you can and can't do, and so you have to work to get that level of production up. So I think the level of production that I was able to gain from working in that TV field helped me produce these new projects.
So you said a couple things that I think really that translated with my own experience. So the idea of like an ensemble, we have our traditional orchestras. I came up playing in like a traditional rock band with a guitar, bass, drums, singers. And we never had to worry about like where the instruments fit in and if there was room for them, because that design is sort of like a preset or like a template that just
Mm-hmm.
works.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the music that I've gotten into that I do since getting involved with the computer, where I have access to synthesizers and drum machines, suddenly that template is gone. There's nothing there. So it was a big, I guess, moment when I realized like, okay, I still need like this rhythmic element, this bass element, but I can't have 5 basses going, even though I like all of these sounds I made, because they don't work together well. And you just start layering things. And it was a different way of thinking where it's more like, what job is this sound going to play? That I think
Right.
you miss out if you're just playing in traditional kind of ensembles that are, tested and work over the years.
And and one thing is a guiding principle of mine is the use of silence and the use of rests. And when we get really deep into our DAWs, it's so easy to lose sight because we can make sound last forever. We can stretch notes. We can
Hmm.
do all this stuff that humans can't do. And even if we are in the electronic music business, our listeners are still human. So they still like pauses. They like little breath marks and things like that. So I think if I could instill to listeners that are, say, maybe listening and trying to get some advice on how to make their mixes better or how to make it sound more live, is don't forget space, don't
Hmm.
forget silence, don't forget rests. It's okay to have rests, and sometimes rests make the note that happens right after it or right before it sound even better. The use of silence, the use of articulations, and just trimming your notes just a little on the ends when you're in those grids and you can look at your notes. Just trim a little off so there's just a little breath, there's a little space between the notes. It helps the attack. I know we get spoiled with our compressors and we can change the attacks of things. But one way of naturally changing attack is the last note that happened before it could just be a little shorter. And then you're going to hear the
Hmm.
attack of the trombone or the bass clearer. There's that comparison there. So that's one thing I definitely want to mention is, from what you just said.
The most important notes are the notes you don't play. And
Yeah, as a leader of different groups, I say it's kind of a joke, but I say, remember, one of the things you can do with your instrument is not play it.
right.
you
Yeah.
you don't, a group of 40 people all talking at the same time for 5 minutes is not interesting.
Hmm.
We need some time for one group to have focus and the other group. And it definitely translates into electronic music. Your bass and your guitar and your keyboard and your singer, they don't all have to be the star for 4 minutes. If you've got a killer bass groove, let it be naked there in the mix for one measure or two measures. That's enough for the listener to lock in on it and enjoy the heck out of that bass groove. And then they can appreciate the rest of the ensemble. It's just, I get guilty of it too, is we can make it all sound at the same time. And why not? But then we listen to the mix later. I was talking about like that final product. The final product doesn't sound real, or it doesn't sound human, or what's missing. And sometimes it's the simple things of, well, you're trying to get all your tracks at top volume for the
Hmm.
whole song, and it's not good.
I always fight the temptation when I'm first, say, laying down some tracks to not have the part I'm working on play the entire time. I think it's very easy to hold down that note until the next note has to come. And next thing you know, you have a few layers and everything's just going at once, and you've taken away from each layer. It's a weird paradox of subtraction by addition, where I think especially, I'm sure with your work where you're using like one of the main features is that you are using all these different instruments to combine into this one sound. But if they're all doing something at once, you don't get to appreciate the detail of it and the subtle
Exactly.
timbres and all that stuff that is the whole reason why you're doing it.
Exactly. And what you can do as a challenge is, I gave the example earlier of a ukulele and a trumpet or something. What you can do though is you can kind of steal from the ukulele's sharp attack. So that gives the ear the attack of the note, but then you're really focused on the trombone, or you're really focused on the long sounding instrument. But without that attack in the beginning, the notes in the line would be less. So while we might not even hear that plucked string that started the note, we feel it. The reason when I'm working in, I use Logic, and I like being able to see the view where I'm seeing where the instruments are coming in, the lines going by, and okay, now I see this group of four is about to come in, and I like to visually see it like a conductor looks at an orchestral score. When you look at an orchestral score, you have the line, you've got your flutes and your violins and the different sections, and you can see where they're coming in. And as a conductor, you're looking ahead because you need to make cues and you need to bring people in and you need to do things. So you're always looking ahead. And in Logic, I like to know as a mixer, oh, okay, this is about to happen. So I'm prepared to listen for something there. I don't like the loop feature, the loop arrangement one, because you can't see it. It doesn't work for me. It works for a lot of people that make really great music and are very successful. For me, I was trained as a young kid going to Eastman, starting at 13, and I was trained in classical and jazz. And so for me, it works best to use the view where I can see the instruments coming in. And I could never wrap my head around the loop one. It's just something I can't do it.
Right.
And some friends of mine are awesome at it. And it's like magic to me. I don't understand how they do it. I don't know. How do you work? What's your preference?
Well, I like them both. Like Ableton Live has the session view where you get the clips, which are basically the loops, which now Logic has. I forget the exact name they have for it, but it's essentially the same idea where it's just the little box and it's going. That to me is often like my palette. So I think of it that way, where I'll get a bunch of ideas going. And a lot of times I'm building up a section kind of to maximum, where I've got all my parts and everything's kind of going in the grand finale, triumphant, maximum sense. And then I'll take that and bring it to the more traditional left to right arrangement view, which I think of as the canvas. And that's where I'm putting things. And a lot of times I'm doing kind of arranging by subtraction. So I'll have it kind of like, this is where I want it to get. And let me remove things so that when it gets there, it does actually make a difference. Because it's all relative. I mean, you can't have a big part in your song if you don't have something smaller leading up to it.
Exactly. Yeah, contrast is really important. And I think one thing, the way I teach it is, if you've ever had to paint your house or paint your garage or something, if you're not a professional painter, you buy lots more paint. It takes much more paint for you to do the job. If you hire a professional painter, they'll come with one tiny little bucket, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's enough for the house. Don't worry," and he can do it, and it looks better than what I did, and he used less paint. And as a composer, a new songwriter, a new composer, they think that they need more stuff adding all the time, and they have to come up with more and more new ideas, not realizing that the first couple ideas they had were so genius and so great that if we just worked on those ideas, your song would be 10 times better. And all those other ideas you just added, save them. They're good, but that's another song. That's whatever else. And the more mature you get as a composer, you realize you don't need all those buckets of paint. You don't need all this stuff. You can get a lot done with a little bit of ideas. You just have to know how to tweak them and play with them. And maybe you flip it upside down, or maybe you, if it started out as long notes, you play the same melody, but now it's real short or real fast. You know, they turn into 16th notes instead of long half notes or something. So there's ways of using what you got to make it more exciting. And also with architecture of a song, I like to, I guess, be a little bit scientific or analytical. Like if I have to make a track for television and it has to be 90 seconds, and they want to break here and they want to break there, then that's kind of liberating for me. I know that I have to write about 40 seconds worth of music, and then it's going to have a clean break as an edit point, and then they're going to come in with this other thing here, and you can draw out like a real rudimentary line. Do you want your song to start real quiet and end at a climax? Do you want your song to come up to a climax, then break down, and then build up to a bigger climax? Do you want it to be monotone like a trance tune and it's kind of the same forever? Do you want to start really huge and then die down and then get back to the big at the end? There's lots of shapes, and it can be as easy as just drawing on a piece of paper with a pen and paper. Just draw a line of what you want your song to look like, you know, sonically. And then you take that template, that drawing that you made on a notebook, and when you go into Ableton, you go into Logic, you're like, okay, we're going to follow these lines. We know we'll have 12 measures to get to this point. Then we're going to have 7.5, and then we're going to have 20, and the song will be done. And you can use just drawing to help you create a track. And sometimes the most paralyzing thing for a student, for a composer, is a blank canvas where you have total freedom. It's kind of paralyzing and intimidating. Like, you open up your program, you've got access to instruments that only people could have dreamt about 20 years ago. And you're like, okay, well, where do I start? What do I do? Right? It's kind of paralyzing and daunting. So if you have just a little plan of attack and this is more, I guess, for working professionals or people that are trying to do it a lot, or if you're trying to churn out a lot of work, have a game plan going in before you even open your program that you want the song to have this shape to it. And then just try to follow that shape and see if it works for you. It works for me. And as we all know in the music industry, there's as many people in the industry, there's that many ways that it can work, right? So you take from other people what works for you. You kind of hear you and I speak right now, and maybe a couple ideas are like, oh, the listener's like, yeah, oh, that makes sense. I'm going to take that one. And then we talk about something else, and he goes, I'm not going to do that, you know? So we kind of we're always listening. We're like, oh, he does it that way? Oh, let me try that. Maybe it'll turn out. So,
yeah, you know, this is something I hear a lot from people that do film and television work, is those constraints, that those directions, like, all right, it has to do this at this moment, and when the scene gets here, this is the big explosion, or this is where we need a little.
Yes, and if they say 23.5 seconds, they mean 23.5 seconds. And they mean all effects, all reverb, all anything has to be dead at 23.5 seconds. So, like, that's just another word of advice for listeners. Like, if you get in that position where a music supervisor is asking you for something, give them exactly what they want. Do not be like me and get an email later and says, you have bleed. I can't use this. It bleeds past 23.5. It's like 23.7 seconds. They won't use it.
Right.
Because there's a million other people like me that are also writing songs, and they did it right. So they're going to take the other guy who followed the directions. Yeah. But I just really want to make that a point, because I think it's useful for your listeners that they make sure if someone puts out a weird request, like it has to be 19 seconds long, make it 19. Don't make it 19.5. Don't make it 18.7. Make it 19. You know, you can tweak the tempo by 1 or 2 beats per minute. If your phrasing was perfect and you don't know how to fix, just make it 1 or 2 clicks faster or slower so it fits that time and just cut it off there.
Yeah, it seems like a counterintuitive thing, but having that limitation seems to free up a lot of the composers I speak to that are in that field where they almost can't make a track if they don't have that. I had someone on the show at one point. He's like, I don't even know how you make a song without those limitations, or at least the plan, like you said, of like the arrangement or where it's going to go, what points are going to be the high points. And I think so often it's exciting and fun to go into the project free and like, I can use any sound in the world and it can be anything. Here we go. But I find out
And
I'm just searching through presets for 45 minutes and
yeah, an hour and a half goes by. You've listened to a lot of really great patches and you haven't composed anything.
Right.
But you had a really great time.
Yeah.
You had a lot of fun playing little licks and stuff with these cool sounds, but you didn't record anything. Yeah, it happens to me. It still happens to me. And even though I do like having a plan, and I'm a big proponent of having a plan, I still like, waking up in the morning, going upstairs and playing on the keyboard and just playing. And I like it to be organic also. I've been a trained pianist. I love just sitting on some chords and just getting a vibe from that. Just play the chord progression for a few minutes and, just jam, like put a drum loop on and just play something to it. And it's just, it kind of wakes you up. It kind of loosens your fingers. It loosens the creative muscles. And then you, maybe even by just doodling around on a chord progression, you start to hear a melody in your head and you think, oh, ooh, I like this. Yeah, this could be something. So sometimes organically it can happen. And I like to have a bit of both attacks. It's just more, it always comes down to, why are you writing? Are you writing for some specific target? If it's that you're writing for streaming, you want to put out a single like I did yesterday with the Prayer Garden, you have a single coming out, well then that's your audience, so you're going to write in that direction. If you're writing and it's underscore for a scene in a show, then that's your direction, that's your goal. So knowing where it's going to end up or why you're writing to begin with is a really important question to ask yourself first before you sit down. And also another question I ask of students is, what's your genre? Who are your heroes? And when I'm teaching, I love to listen to my students' heroes, because I feel like if that's the destination of where they're trying to get, then the answers I'm going to give are going to be helping them in that direction. Because from mixing, you can take one track and you can make it a dance track, or you could make it this political, like crushing, I don't know, statement piece, or you could make it, and it's the same notes and it's the same group, but it really depends on where you wanted that to end up. Where is the goal? Who is your audience? And if you know that, and the heroes, like, oh, I really love this artist, then we're going to find out why. What is that artist doing in their music? What goal points do they do? Like when I was starting in TV and I was listening to other successful television composers, again, I got out a pen and paper, I drew a line, and I would pause it every time there was a change, and I'd put, okay, at 12 seconds this happened, or at 15 seconds they added in this, and I would just do my homework and my research that way so that I knew a template to follow, because I was the new kid on the block. I'm the new guy, but I want to make a living at this, so, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You look at what the masters are doing, and you copy a template, and then only after copying that template can you find your own voice, because you're going to find your own way. There's no risk that if you copy the rules or the breaks that your favorite person's doing, you're never going to sound like that person, because you're not that person. You're going to sound like you, and over time you're going to sound even more like you, but you're just using the information from the masters, from the person that inspired you to buy a microphone anyway. You wanted to be like this guy, or you wanted to be like this girl. So some reason you decided to buy it, you decided to download the program. So find out what it is about that person. What exactly are they doing? So that you can start your own journey into being your own artist.
Yeah, when I first started playing, it was in rock bands, and had
Me too.
a relatively limited, you know, approval of music. You know, like I was into my thing, and there were all these like, I mean, I used to think like I didn't like music with drum machines. Like drum machines aren't cool. You need a real drummer. Only to find out years later that some of my favorite songs actually were drum machines. I just wasn't smart enough to know. But maybe in those days, a lot of the stuff I was writing and the bands I was playing in sounded kind of derivative of our influences. But as we continue to go on and play longer and longer, you get more and more of this, more of that, this influence, that influence, where kind of like you said, like now I don't even worry about that stuff anymore. Where,
Yeah, it was important, and then you outgrew it. But you always appreciate it though. Still, like your favorite records from your whatever years, you'll still appreciate it and you listen to it. And I grew up in a very musical home. My father was a Vietnam veteran. He had some PTSD, and his therapy was music. And he had lost hearing from being in the war. And we lived in a pretty, regular sized house. So music at really high volumes was very normal in my house. And he listened to everything. So growing up, I got to hear lots and lots of different stuff. He started taking me to see the Philharmonic when I was 9 or 10, and he was surprised that I actually really enjoyed it. And my mom was super happy because she hated going. So she didn't have to go anymore. My dad's got his new orchestra buddy. So I was doing that. But I started in rock bands too. And like my heroes when I was 8 or 9 were Tommy Lee and Tico Torres and the drummers of the hair bands. And I just thought they were the coolest. So as soon as I was 10 and school let you pick an instrument, I picked percussion and I got drumsticks. I didn't even know which end was the front, which one was the back. What's this little drum head for? Is that so you hold on to it? Or is that what you hit with? I didn't know anything, but I was just so excited to have a pair of drumsticks. And then, yeah, by 12, I started in a rock band and played in my basement. And those times are some of the best times of your life when you're just starting out and you're horrible. You're horrible. It's terrible. But it's so fun, and you feel powerful. Like, wow, you're playing this rock music and it just feels really good. And
yeah.
but for me, I always wanted more. I always wanted to know why and how. And so I wanted to study masters, and that's how I got into jazz. I was really into rock and I loved playing rock, but I wanted just more diversity in my playing. I liked Jimi Hendrix a lot and Mitch Mitchell and his, their drumming and just the craziness. And then I realized that that Jimi Hendrix actually liked Tony Williams and was asking his drummer to sound more like Tony Williams. And I thought, well, who's Tony Williams? So then I have to find out about Miles Davis, and then it just goes on, and the rabbit hole is deeper and deeper and deeper, and you realize you can dedicate your whole life to just trying to play your instrument because there's so many things. And I'm 42 now, and I'm still like that as a kid. Like I was in Mongolia and I was like a kid in a candy store. That is such an interesting, detached from the rest of the world place, and their instruments are beautiful and exotic to me as a Westerner. And how do they get those sounds? And then you want to ask more in-depth questions about how are they playing or why do they play that? I don't know. But starting in rock was a great thing for me. Lots of fun. It's a time to be creative, and there's no repercussions because you're just writing songs with your friends, and there's no pressure to make it have a million hits on YouTube. When I was in a rock band, we didn't have the internet because I'm old. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm really glad we didn't have YouTube and Instagram, because who knows what would be out there now. Yeah. So, but we didn't have a pressure of we need 100 views or in this. No, we were just writing songs. And it was free. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, following your influences leads you to all kinds of places. And that's, I guess, the thing. Like you ultimately develop your own interesting heritage of influences that it's almost impossible to sound like a ripoff of anything, because you will inevitably inject your own self and ruin that copycat thing that you might be doing. I'll often hear a song and say, I want to make a song like that song. Like, I love the way that song makes me feel, or the vibe, or it's like the perfect mood for doing this or that. And I'll go in with that intention, and I don't even have to worry about copying it because I'll ultimately ruin it along the way and go my own, throwing enough of my own thing that it becomes you would never know
Well,
really.
the best music is always deeply personal, and our limitations kind of guarantee that we're not going to sound like Nirvana. We're not going to sound like whoever because we're not them. We didn't have their education or their experience in how they got to that level. So we're never going to sound just like them. We could sound derivative. We could sound like a ripoff, but we will hear that too as the artist, and we won't be happy with that. We won't be happy with ourselves sounding like a ripoff. No one wants to sound like a ripoff. They want to sound like something new. So our limitation of not being that person guarantees we're not going to sound just like them. And then it's also going to guarantee that we're going to be unhappy just sounding like a copycat.
Yeah.
So we're going to look for a new direction. We might say, oh, they always go to the 4 chord there. Let's try a 2 chord instead. Oh, yeah, that sounds weird, but weird in a good way. So I think I can get away with this. We'll just try different things until we get our sound. And I think musicians now that are starting and are in the process, or maybe they're almost there. One thing artists have to do now that I didn't have to do in the 90s is you have to be good at both the engineering side and the creation side. And that's learning two completely different arts. I mean, there's the engineering side is an art. The performing side is an art, and they both require immense amount of hours to learn how to do it. And while we have an awesome ability to, on our phone or on our laptop, record and make music, it's also very, very daunting because you have to be good at two very difficult things. You have to be good at performing, and you have to be good at engineering. And no one is, I mean, almost no one is really at the top of their industry in both recording and in performing.
At the same
They're always
time,
going to
too.
at the
if you
same
could-
time.
Yeah.
No, one's always going to be better. You're either
Yeah.
going to be a stronger engineer or you're going to be a stronger performer. When I was starting and learning Pro Tools and I was in college learning how to record, and I was taking some courses with Clark Rigsby, who's a pretty well-known, great, stellar engineer. I learned from him some great things, but I also learned that I can't do this. It's not my calling. My calling isn't to analyze how far the microphone is from the guitar amp, the cabinet, or which microphone to use for it to capture it in the best way, or how far the singer needs to be, or what microphone captures this singer the best, or what effects. That's so much stuff
Yeah.
to know. I wanted to be a composer and a performer, so I just made a conscious decision to try to go that route, not knowing that technology was about to erupt and I would have to learn both anyway. And so musicians today need to at least give themselves some credit, pat themselves on the back a little, encourage themselves a little, that what they're asking of themselves used to be two distinctly different career paths, that people spent decades learning how to do that correctly. So when you're unhappy with why doesn't your track sound like X, well, it doesn't sound like X because you're one person trying to do everything that a team of 4 or 6 professionals, is doing. I mean, if you're playing basketball, but you're not as good as the Lakers or the Clippers, well, why not? Well, because they spent their whole life perfecting how to do it, and they're a team.
Yeah.
You're one person.
Right.
So of course it's not going to work. So be kind to yourself and say, okay, I did it. It's good. It's not the level I want, but there's reasons why. So give yourself a little credit out there, guys and gals.
Yeah, I think they're almost like opposite mindsets sometimes too, because if you are performing and you're trying to be creative, you're in this artistic mindset. But if you're recording, which you probably are doing at the same time, that's a little more technical. It's a little more. Of course you can be artistic and have fun with it, but you are doing a more, whatever it is, left or right side of the brain. One is the technical, one is the creative. You're kind of having to work in both of those realms at the same time. which I think
Yes.
is a challenge too.
And so I also like to promote people being friends with other people and opening up their projects to other people, so that, like on the prayer garden, I did all the recording, I did the mixing, but I have a friend that is just light years ahead of me in their mixing and engineering skills. So I brought him into the project and we worked together on it. And the end result was far better than what I could have done on my own. And this is after me being 10 years working on TV, and it was good enough for TV, right? But for my artistic thing, I thought, no, I want, these elements and this one frequency. They're not popping out for some reason. I don't know exactly why. And then an engineer can look at it and he can, in seconds, tell you, oh, well, did you trim this? Did you do this? Where are you running this from? And they can pinpoint the problem in seconds. Just like me as a composer, if someone asked me, why is this duet not working, I could say, oh, well, they're both in the same register, or the intervals are off, and I can tell you pretty quickly. And yes, they're very finely developed skills. So when say you're a great singer, but you're not a great guitar player, or you're not great at harmonies, then try working with someone that's a killer keyboardist, or just a great person in the studio of making up some loops that sound awesome for you to sing over. Or if you can't sing, work with some people that can, or get a lyricist if your lyrics aren't really quite popping. And a team effort on some of these things, you're going to learn from each other. So you can still have your own personal projects on the side, because you're learning from your friends and they're learning from you. And together you're getting better at this. And you're probably making colleagues for life. The people I work with now in my 40s are the same. Some of them are the same people I started out when I was 20, and we're still in the business together. And now we know what each other knows, right? We know that he's best at this guy's best at this girl can do this the best. And we just, we can work with each other's strengths. We promote each other's works through social media. There's so many benefits to just being friendly and just working with other people. It's not selfish if you're giving. Also, when people are asking you, how did you do it? And you're free with your information and helping them, then it's not you just trying to steal their labor or something. It's about all of you pushing each other towards whatever your goals are.
Yeah, and it's not just a one-way street where if I work with someone else, say they're going to play the bass guitar for me, even though I could technically grab the bass myself and do it, but they're going to do something I would never think of. And now the best part for me in a lot of ways is that sparks me to think differently about what I'm going to do next. And it's this constant back and forth of like sparks flying between you, where now what I just did that I would have never have done changes what you're going to do, and you're going to do that again, and that's going to come back to me. And it becomes so quickly greater than the sum of the two people.
Exactly. And that's why with the Pangean Orchestra, the big thing is to put them in the same room together. There's plenty of projects, especially in COVID times, of doing the tracks and mixing them via video, and everyone's in different parts of the country or the world. But when you're in the same room and you have to work together, yes, something better than the sum of the parts comes out of it. That give and take, even the disagreements, even the passionate arguments, could actually be because both of you really want a great product, and you both have very different ideas of what's going to make that big product. But if you do listen to each other through the impassioned arguments, I like euphemisms, by the way. So that real passionate discussion.
Yeah.
If you listen to each other, both people probably have some good points.
Yeah.
And there's got to be some way to get to a level where if the one person had it his own way, it would be okay. If you had it your own way, it would be okay. But when you work together, oh, that's where the magic happens. I mean, even the Beatles, right? The Beatles were most magical when they're all together, all creating. They were all individually great musicians, but when they were together in a studio, in a room, that's when. And they had some great behind the board people too. I mean, it was just a whole team effort to get that magical sound that's going to be living for forever. I think in 200 years, people still know who the Beatles are.
Yeah, probably my favorite group of all time. And a lot of it is that story of how they worked together and bounced ideas off of each other. I think when I
And
was, yeah, sorry.
oh, and they were big into playing covers. They
Yeah,
started for several years just playing covers in really divey bars.
Hamburg
And
and
so, yeah, in
all
Germany,
night.
right.
Yeah.
In some sketchy,
They were
sketchy
kids on
places.
uppers and alcohol
Yeah.
for 12-hour sets.
But 12 hour set, those chord progressions, those
Yeah.
choruses, those bridges that they're learning are so in their DNA now that they can go off and have that freedom because they've put in those years of hard work.
Mm.
And so I really, I guess I'm biased in that I like to understand what came before me, and I like to study masters and how they do it. And I feel like anyone that wants to be a successful musician in whatever genre they want to be, the more that they can like check their ego for a minute and say, okay, I'm just going to be a student. I'm just going to be a kid. I'm just going to listen to the song. I'm going to hear what they're doing. And the more they can study how they made that sound, I mean, the War Pigs track by Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath. I remember listening to that a couple months ago, and I got so obsessed with the drum sounds. And I could tell, because I'm a drummer, I could tell it sounds like a small jazz kit. And it was kind of the first heavy metal album of all time. But they've got this small jazz kit. And how did they engineer that to give it a big sound that would fill a heavy metal vibe?
Mm.
And I even Googled the drum set and I saw photos of it. And I read how did they record it. I get a little nerdy about the stuff. I really like to know because I love the sound. And
Yeah.
when you love a sound, you want to know how did they do it? It's like a magic trick. How did you do that magic trick? And for me, learning the truth behind the magic trick for music anyway, it doesn't spoil the wonder. It just kind of opens me up to new possibilities, new ideas.
Yeah, I get that too a lot. That there is certainly in my mind some sort of magic to music, and
Yes.
it's the balance of creativity and technicality and the emotional side, but also like the engineering stuff is so specific. There's rules, but you break them in beautiful ways, and just the magic that happens when it all comes together. Seeing behind the curtain and how that works, and starting to understand, maybe like, all right, well, I understand this chord progression now. I see what they're doing. They're borrowing from this mode or whatever. It's not. It doesn't diminish that at all. It almost makes it expand and just show
I,
you that there's just so many ways you can go, and so much magic there to be found.
One of the best courses I took in university in music was form and analysis, and it was a year class, and it took various pieces by mostly by Mozart, and the class was so great because you realized that an entire symphony, everything related back to the first three notes that they played at the very beginning of the piece. So, whatever that little, seemingly insignificant, seemingly irrelevant little idea that popped out from a piccolo or from a cello in the first measure is exactly what you're hearing for the next 12 minutes from a full symphony. They're just playing with those three notes. Everything that the symphony did can relate back to that. And for me, going so deep into that music, for me, it didn't ruin the magic. For me, it just opened up, wow, there's this whole universe out there that I didn't know existed. And I never would have heard that music ever like that. I never would have appreciated it at this higher level
Mm.
because I never had a teacher guiding me measure by measure. We had thick books of the scores and measure by measure. Oh, now see how they transferred it to the clarinets, and oh, now they're playing it upside down, and now they just modulated, and oh, now they've extended it, and now they're in double time, and now they're, but it's all the same thing. To me it was just life changing, I guess, being able to study that deeply into it. So it didn't take the magic away, and I feel confident that if it didn't do it for me, if it didn't kill it for me, I don't think it would kill it for you either. To know more about how they do it. Ignorance is never awesome in music because going to end up making mistakes that you didn't have to, and you're slowing yourself down, because you're going to end up being unhappy with that decision later. And if you had studied more and if you had looked at what these people did, you wouldn't have made these mistakes. And mistake is a bad word in music, but there's always just better choices that you can make. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What is the goal of the song? The goal of the song really should dictate the choices you make in the editing and in the composition to get that vibe or to get that goal that you had. If you're trying to please your audience and your audience loved your last album, well, you don't have to play the exact same thing in your next album, but like listen to the fans. What did they like about it? What do they like about what you're doing? Because that's a really great way of knowing what's working and what's not working. And unfortunately for me, and maybe for you, and probably for a lot of your listeners, some of the tracks that I'm least proud of or were least excited about are my most successful and have paid me the most money and have been on TV the most. And they're songs that I would never put on a feature list of, hey, check me out, here's my tracks, because they didn't speak to me. I don't know. It wasn't my thing. And then some of the songs that I've spent years writing and rewriting and getting musicians to play on it and spending money in studios, and they're duds. The public didn't like it. It's just not commercially viable, whatever. That happens too. It's funny. You can be, your personal favorite songs can end up being like the world's least favorite. And then some of the songs that you're like, yeah, I did it for this guy. He needed some songs about this, so I did it. And they're super popular. And pretty much like probably any successful band probably feels that same way. You know, they've done all this great work, like Radiohead, right? But everyone just wants to hear the hits. Like they just want to hear Creep again or something. And he's like, but I've done all this other cool stuff. Yeah, you did, but it's not Creep. I want to hear Creep, which is a great song. I'm not trying to diss on that song, but as an artist, I'm sure he's just sick of being asked to play a song he wrote 25 years ago when they're composing new stuff too, you know.
Yeah, that's an interesting example. I mean, I've heard that sentiment from so many artists. Like, you know, they'll talk about their great concept record and all that went into it, and then they just want to hear the bubblegum simple song they wrote that doesn't mean anything to them. But
even the Beatles, right?
Yeah,
like even
true.
the Beatles, like their most artistic, cool, creative stuff. That's not what people listen to. I mean, most people. The reason the Beatles made so many jillions of dollars is they also knew how, from playing in those cover bands, how to write a hit.
Yeah.
And their hits are what people know, but they probably, and I don't know them personally, I never met any of them, but you know, the songs that they probably felt like, oh, this was a real dream to write and record, it's maybe number 70 on people's favorite tracks or something, you know, of theirs.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I might have to do maybe with the audience thing you're mentioning, like who is this for, or what is the purpose of this song really, I guess is what you're saying. What is the point of it? Maybe in the case of Radiohead, Creep I can see is like definitely more digestible than some of their other stuff. And I love Radiohead. You know, they're amazing, and you know, one of those groups I always come back to. But they are also like a time and a place for them. I have put them on before and killed the mood. You know, like sometimes it gets a little dark with them.
Yes, definitely.
But maybe it's Creep can kind of stand up on a kind of rock out to this song, having a good time still, where some of their other stuff doesn't always qualify. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it could be. So remember, your music doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
None of our music exists in a vacuum, and your audience doesn't exist in a vacuum. Your audience is aware of the music that's out there, especially the music that's pushed the most.
Right.
The music that is just kind of forced into us, and I think in today's world, it's actually less than it was in the 90s or so, where radio was so powerful that you hear the same 8 tracks all day long, no matter what radio station you're listening to. Yeah, you're going to hear these 8 to 10 songs all the time. But now we are fortunate that we can make our own playlist and we can gravitate towards our own musicians that we like. And that's a beautiful thing. But they don't exist in a vacuum. There is kind of a set, agreed upon standard among people of our country and in the United States. And the United States is the major exporter of pop culture to the rest of the world. So we know, okay, we have to hit a chorus by this part of the song. We need to have, a verse and a chorus, a verse, chorus. We need to have a bridge in there. And then we're going to do these things. And then that's going to be in line with what people are used to. And then within that confine, we can be creative, but we need to make sure we give the audience what they're used to. And then once the audience is used to us and they trust us, then we can try to experiment a little with what we want as a form. So it's a little bit of give and take where, yes, you want to be your own individual shining snowflake that's unlike any other snowflake, but you also want to be at least identifiable as a snowflake. You don't want to be so different that people don't even realize you're a snowflake. They think you're something else. So to be identifiable, you have to play along with some of the rules. You have to stick with one key. If you're in the key of D minor, then you're in D minor. And if you want to play some notes outside of D minor, like an F sharp or a B natural, then you have to have a reason to play those notes. It has to still make sense within the key. So there are some agreed upon rules that we're just going to, as a community, like. And a song, songs like Creep and like, I don't know, I'm blanking on some others from Beatles or whoever, they followed the rules and they gave the audience what they wanted. They gave them a nice, clean cut verse, chorus, bridge, and out. Or right now with Spotify and streamings, it feels like a lot of the pop music is starting with the chorus first, even.
Yeah.
Because listeners only listen for 6 seconds or 7 seconds before. I was talking about the great side of technology as we can listen to who we want. On the downside, as an artist, you're only allowed 5 to 8 seconds to make an impression on a new person before they just switch to the other billionth person who also has streaming on these devices. So you have to hit them really fast. So that's just a rule that we have to live with in 2020, is that we're only given a few seconds to capture an attention from someone. And once we've got their attention, then we can be more free. So we have to be respectful of the rules that our community has agreed on. We can make our own stuff. We can break all those rules. We can say, heck to establishment and do whatever. But then don't be surprised when the audience doesn't respond to it. It's too foreign to them. You have to kind of spoon feed them a little in the beginning. Or just be so absolutely different, and that's your brand, and I don't know, make a run for it that way. But I think the reason why, like U2 is a great example too. U2 has tons of great music, and they're known for maybe two or three songs that are just really pop, and and they're the gods of it. But I love U2. I love their music. Had a big impact on me, and but they knew how to play the game. So I think it's just being respectful of the community that we're all living in, knowing what listeners are used to, and then knowing how to approach those listeners.
Now, let me ask you then, one of the big features of what you do, and especially with the Pangean Orchestra, is it? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that name, by the way, of
Thanks.
the original continent, kind of like coming back together.
Thank you.
But a lot of what you're doing is sort of based on pulling things from different areas that might not be what people are used to, and to use your word, like foreign, like literally in this case too, with the sounds. What kinds of things do you try to maintain so that you don't lose that kind of, I guess, like for people to enjoy music, there needs to be like a little bit of familiarity. It's always a hard word for me to say, but there also needs to be the surprise. And I think you've got a lot of the surprise coming in automatically just with the instrumentation. So I guess my question is, like, how do you not let that get away from you and become a little too artistic, experimental, where you would lose your audience, as you were saying before?
Well, that's been definitely one of the prime challenges since we started back in 2009, before we even played out in public. There's a few kind of guiding principles. One of them is, I don't want to be imperialism with a smiling face, and I feel like music in America has become so ubiquitous in the rest of the world that it is a form of Western imperialism, that it's killing some of these indigenous instruments. Because if you're living in Tanzania, it's more cool to learn how to play rock guitar and play American songs, even in Tanzania, than it is to play your own traditional music. In Turkey, it's more cool to know Michael Jackson than it is to know some of your own musicians. So there is this kind of imperialism that's kind of a kind imperialism, but it's just as destructive. So with Pangean Orchestra, my vision and what I'm trying to do is not take like a U2 song and just have it played on sitar or something. I'm trying to, let's create some new works that showcase the sounds of the world. And to do that is a huge challenge, because what sounds beautiful to us, and in the studio as an engineer, there's, in many African traditions, they like ornamentation on their instrument that's really just comes out as buzz to an engineer, and it would drive an engineer crazy. They would think there's a loose nut somewhere in the stand that's holding the instrument, and they're going to go try to fix it. But to the musician, their instrument is that buzz and the tone that their string plays, and the tone of the marimba. But they also have these things bouncing around on their instrument, and that's part of the beauty. So you quickly learn that beauty is really not, it's not the same across all peoples.
Subjective,
And
yeah.
it is totally. And so that's a challenge. And then what we have to do in the group is say, okay, we're going to do this one piece that's maybe more Caribbean style, and we're going to play it, and we're going to let those musicians take leadership in the group to get a sound out that they feel like is a good vibe and respectful to how they play. We might have a piece from Afghanistan or India, and we're going to let them first play it in the rehearsal the way it would show up in a concert hall in their country, and so we can hear the original. Then we say, okay, well, how do we extrapolate that into a larger group so that we can play something, but we're not McDonaldizing it, we're not Disneying it up, and we're not just making it sanitized for a Western audience, because that would be devastating to me, and it's not what we're about. We're trying to show the beauty of these other places. So there's a challenge in people not losing their identity when they're trying to create this work. So focus me back on the original question was...
Well, yeah, you've got like two conflicting things, right? You want to preserve the integrity of the instruments and the sound. You don't want to like overly Westernize or Americanize or I love that, McDonaldize the sound, but you also want to make it accessible and...
Right, and accessible to who? That's the other big question.
Yeah.
Is accessible to Americans, or accessible to the people from Ireland or wherever they were from, or accessible to who? So that's another question. So as far as branding and marketing and stuff, that's a question that hasn't been answered yet, is, well, who? So we've been able to narrow it down to, well, people that are already seeking out music from Africa, or people that already sought out some Middle Eastern music and they're a little curious. So what we see ourselves as is like a bridge into learning more about that culture. So when we put on a show, we do two things. We do the full ensemble, and we also have little duets or trios come up and perform, so that the audience gets a little taste of what the real thing was from that country. Then they see how we do it. And so far, it's been a really fun and positive experience. No one has come up after a show and said, you totally exploited my culture, or you totally ruined the nature of this song or something. No one's ever been like that. The overall experience has been, wow, I never would have imagined this traditional piece ever sounding like that. It's so trippy. It's so crazy to me. We did this traditional Okinawan song. I think it's the only thing we have on Spotify. The song is called Teen Sagu Nu Hana, the Pangean Orchestra, and it's an old Okinawan song. And then we gave it like a New Orleans Dixieland treatment, and then we also had some Caribbean stuff, and at some parts it almost sounds like Bob Marley, and then it goes back to sounding Dixieland, and then and in the beginning we've got a Mayan trumpet with Sanshin and the man singing in Japanese. So it's just a trip, and the people that were in it afterwards, they were like, "Wow, this is just crazy," and that's what I want. I want people that brought the song to us to be excited with, "Wow, this is such a new treatment of it," and I can't wait to show all my friends and all my colleagues that are also in this traditional music genre. Like I really want to show them it's a new treatment. It's not that they took it and changed it into a top 40 pop song. They really went to the core of the song and the meaning behind that song, and then they were able to find a way to bring it into a large group. And the other thing that comes across is the respect. And another reason why I want all the musicians in the room together is that they feel respected when they're playing their traditional piece that most people in America don't care about. Not because Americans are mean. Americans just don't know about it. We just don't know that these music from the Balkans or from Madagascar exist. We just don't know. So when you're in a room with people that are bending forward in their chairs and really listening, it's this level of respect that they love, and they're talking to a person from a totally different part of the world, but that person has also spent thousands of hours learning their music, and now they want to know about you. It's really a very flattering feeling. And then you're kind of the expert in the room, and when people are playing it and you want to change the articulations, or you want to wait for the chord changes, or you want to wait for this, then that person also gets to be a leader and say, well, no, we should wait and we should do it here. Or no, this is wrong. We need to cut these guys out. And because they have a voice in the creation process, it's also just more respectful. And going back to something you had said about working with your friend, E pluribus unum, like, yes, from the many, this better thing exists, this better thing shows up. So while there's many challenges, there's also so many benefits. It's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I like how that it begins with kind of the respect and understanding of the tradition of the sound. And even you said it earlier, like it's one thing to have the plugins say that can reproduce the samples of the instrument, but it's another like about how it gets played and the styles. And I mean, you could say that about like guitar even. Like if you try to play a guitar on a keyboard by triggering the samples, your voicings are all different. There's certain things you will do that you just really can't do on guitar strings. So I could see how that is so important in preserving
and like
those
the
traditions.
harmonics that can pop out if you're not touching the string quite strong enough, and you accidentally get a harmonic out on your guitar. And sometimes those are the magical parts of a rock show, is the guitar player does play some harmonics maybe by accident, but it sounds so cool. And then they decide to make that part of the solo because the harmonics came out and were super awesome. When you're trying to play it on a piano, there might be, I don't know, you probably know more than I do, if there's a function where you can maybe play less weight on a key and get the harmonic to pop. And if you play it strong, then you get the tone. There probably are some ways to enhance that with MIDI. But again, if you don't know that a guitar can make harmonics, you wouldn't know to look for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I was working on a classical guitar instrument one time, and the magic happened when I added in finger noises. I actually took samples of finger noises that would trigger when you lift your hands off the keys, as if the guitar player is now moving the chord.
Yes. And those are the intimate things that really bring people back to listen to you over and over again, are those little attention to detail. It makes you feel like you're there. It makes you feel like you're intimate and you're so close to the guitarist that you can feel the rubbing of the strings and the fretboard and those kinds of things. Like on great jazz records, you can hear just a lot of other sounds, ambient sounds
breathing,
from the room.
The piano stool squeaking. Yeah,
exactly. So it's all those little sounds that, I love the rhythm sections and the sounds from the 70s of all the R&B and the Motown stuff. They recorded live, really. They tried to isolate their booths and everything, but they were playing live, and there's just this magical sound that happens when they're all recording it live, and they're session players and they're great players. And I mean, in the mid 90s, late 90s, I was working in a studio as the drummer for swing bands, and I would just get a chart and I would sight read the thing, and I would be laying down my drum tracks there. And it wasn't as fun because I'm first and I'm just reading the track, and then they're going to base everything off of my hits. So I don't get the feeling of what it's like to be playing with the bass player and with the rhythm section and hear the trumpet hits. It's not as much fun, but the sound quality is much cleaner. There's no bleed. You know, you don't get any of those grunts. You don't get someone's shoes shuffling on the floor. It's just the drums. So that's one thing we lose when we're not in a room together.
A lot of that stuff is often artificially recreated on my end sometimes when I'm doing music. Sometimes I will allow myself to say something, even just talk or create a human feeling of that together. I've done tracks on with programmed drums where I'll actually just click the sticks in the beginning just to give that idea of just someone starting a song. You know, it's almost like an audio illusion in a way. But
yeah, you're like a painter, you know? You're making it three-dimensional. You're
Yeah,
making it real.
as things have gotten more digital and perfect, I really miss those little touches, those little accidents, or those little things that you probably would have tried to get out. And I play my guitar. I try not to do too much finger noise, but it's gonna get in there. And if I have a programmed guitar that doesn't have that, it's just like, well, let me put that problem back in, you know.
Yeah, but I like the evolution of music, and I like being a part of it. And as I can be nostalgic sometimes, maybe for something that they used to do at this period of recording, I mean, we're not living in that time. We're living in 2020, and there's great music being written and performed in 2020. So I would think, I guess for listeners of yours that are aspiring and trying to get better, I would encourage them to, you only know to add those sounds because you've been in rooms where those sounds happened. But a lot of people, we have to realize they're just on their laptop. They don't have access maybe to a great music school. Maybe they don't know a music person that can teach them. So they don't have those experiences. So it's best if they're not living in a town where, and especially in COVID, they can't go out to a concert now and they can't get close to the stage and just really study what the musicians are doing and kind of just opening up their ears. What else do you hear in the room? What else? Can you get invited in as an intern and just sit in a recording studio and just watch? If you can do anything like that to just broaden your experience base so that when you're back in your room, you know, those things follow you. And when you're writing your song, you know, oh, what if I add some guitar sound or fret, squeaks and finger noise? Maybe that'll do it. You know that because you've been there. So if they can't, then YouTube is great. There's YouTube videos on everything. I don't know, look up some recording sessions, behind the board kind of things, and just search for stuff and just watch and observe and see what they're doing if you can't personally go out somewhere. Technology is really awesome. We have access to be much better musicians than anyone's ever been because, like, when I had to learn a song as a kid, I had a tape deck. I'd have to press play and then stop, play, rewind, play until I hear exactly what they're doing, and then I could practice along. But with our technologies, we can manually just BPM it down, practice to it at that tempo, then bump it up a little, then bump it up a little more until we're playing at that professional level. And these are tools that can make us the best musicians our world's ever seen if we use this technology and just our natural curiosity. If we can match those two, we're going to have musicians just coming up with amazing stuff just because of that access to information. But I think one of the things stopping them is they don't know what to search for. As a professional, I would know what to look for, but as a person who doesn't have a music teacher, whose parents weren't musicians, or they don't even know what to look up. I had heard in one of your interviews that you liked Ableton just because Ableton had so many videos out there, and you were actually using Logic, I think, and then you switched because Ableton was really free with, okay, here's how you do this in our program, here's how you do this. And without even knowing what to search for, you were learning. But with music, sometimes you have to kind of even know to look up, like, what does diatonic mean, or what is the word diatonic? If you don't have access to a theory, anything, and you see the word diatonic, it just sounds like an illness or something. It sounds like a
Yeah,
medication you need some
right.
pills for. So, but we could be, I think we will be fantastic musicians. And I think being alive now is a really exciting time. I mean, you have access to musicians all over the world. You don't have to travel to Mongolia to get access to partnering with musicians from there. It's awesome if you do. I totally recommend visiting, but you don't have to. And if you want to learn about Brazilian music, you can learn it without going. It's better to go. And after 20 years or so of being a professional drummer, this year I went to Carnival in Rio, and I was invited by one of the directors of one of the major samba schools, Porta de Pedra, and I got to play with them in the samba drum. I got to play with Inocentes in the samba drum. I played with Mangueira, and each time I like to humble myself. I like to be like, okay, I'm just the new guy, and I don't have to tell everyone, yeah, I'm a professional drummer. I've been touring forever. It doesn't matter. You just go in the room and you learn from them. You watch their technique. You see how they're playing it. And you realize why samba sounds different when it's being played by Brazilians in their city for their festival. You just see it. And the technique differences are huge. We're worlds apart on how we're trained how to play drums from Brazil to America. But and that's probably one of the reasons, again, like, you'll never sound like the artist that you love. You're going to sound like you because your background is different. If you love Brazilian samba and bossa nova, don't worry. You're not going to sound exactly like Jobim because you're not Jobim. You're you, and that's cool. Like, take Jobim's stuff, learn his songs, and then do your thing. You're not going to sound Brazilian. Don't worry. You're not Brazilian. But yeah, even after 20 years, and that's an exciting thing about music too. I'm a professional composer, conductor. I've written for TV. I've played, but you can still be a student. You can still go and learn so much more stuff. And because music isn't as demanding as playing soccer or football, we can do this until we're 80, 90,
Yeah.
I met Elvin Jones before he died. I met him in 96, and he was still going strong, and nicest guy. I snuck back into the green room. He gave me a 30-minute drum lesson. He was just a super nice, happy guy, loved to play music, and he was just as curious about me. Why am I driving to LA and sneaking into his room to tell him how awesome he is? It didn't happen to him all the time. So he was happy. He's like, oh, let's get some sticks. Let's get a pad. Let's just play for a bit. Show me what you're doing.
That's so
You
cool.
know? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great story, and what you're doing, like, I think at the heart of it is really like you're a learner. You're learning and you're soaking up what all these different traditions have, and I think that's a great mindset and attitude to have for anyone making music. Is you're just sponging and soaking everything up, and it just that enriches your own style and personality.
I think so. I think that it's, if you can put into your own schedule that, you're going to be learning, or you're into your own mentality that, yes, I'm at this point on my musical journey, and I still want to learn about this and this. And you can humble yourself really to be like, okay, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do this, and I want to learn how to do this. Then you're just going to keep getting better. If you decide after you get your degree in music that you know everything about music, then you've just stopped yourself from learning. Like, you've just stunted yourself.
Yeah.
So I think the only thing that getting degrees in music has done for me is it's given me the tools to learn faster. It hasn't given me that expert level. It's just given me the tools to know what to listen for, what to look for, and the words to use to search for information and different things like that. But it doesn't by any means make you the top of your game as soon as you get a diploma. It just means, yeah, you've trained, you've met some requirements. Now you can really start learning. Now you're going to be working in it, and you're going to be playing gigs you hate. You're going to play gigs you love. You're going to play songs you hate. You're going to play songs you love, but you're going to be learning all the time. And even in songs that you can't stand, there's probably something in there. If you allow yourself, you can learn from that song that you hate. And actually, a song that you just absolutely despise probably has a lot to teach you. You can probably learn a lot from that song you absolutely hate. And what you should ask yourself is, all right, I'm going to listen to this song and try to figure out why I hate it so much. Because sometimes in music, you can learn to avoid things. So if you're doing your mix and you're ending up with the sound, and oh, it's like that sound that I hate from that song. That's why the song's not going. So you just take it out and you put in a new patch.
Right.
And there you go. You're good. But also sometimes in like songs that you hate, they might have put like a fuzz on the bass or something that was actually pretty cool, but you just hate the song. But you steal that technique of, I'd like to put a little fuzz on that bass. That would kind of warm up this, dance track I'm doing or something. So you can still learn from artists that you can't stand.
That attitude has really helped me appreciate all kinds of music. Like I mentioned to you before, when I was a teenager, I had these like rules and everything. And I don't like this kind of music because it has that. But as soon as it became an opportunity to learn, I mean, the production techniques from styles of music that I might not enjoy, suddenly, wow, that would work nicely in what I'm doing right now. And then on that level, there's just so much more to enjoy. And like you said, to learn. Just keep going, keep growing.
Yeah, when I was in high school, it was very entrenched. You were either a rocker or you were into hip hop, and the two could never mesh. They could
Until
never
they
mix.
did.
If you're a hip hopper, you're a hip hopper. If you're a rock guy, you're a rock guy. And I loved hip hop when I was a kid. One of my first cassette tapes I bought was Run DMC,
Nice.
and one of the first things I transcribed was Ice-T's Colors. And I learned the words not because I could look it up on Google, but because I just press play, pause, play, pause, wrote down the words, and learned to rap. But I had to keep it a secret. I couldn't tell my friends because they're all rockers, and I would get like kicked out of the cool club, So I had to secretly like hip hop. And then classical music, I had to tell my friends it was a drag. Oh, my dad's making me go there. I had to like have these covers, but actually I really liked it, but I had to tell people, no, man, you know me, I'm grunge rock to the core, but yeah, I'm going to go check out this symphony for a little while, whatever.
I'll wear my ripped jeans, don't worry.
Yeah, but I think now, I mean, I've done classes with students and shown them, because that mentality still exists a little bit. Like maybe you're into really underground hip hop, so you don't like pop, whatever's the top song on the Billboard 100, or you don't like country music or something. But in the class, if you can show them, here's the form that they used in this hip hop track, and then you show them a song from the other end of their spectrum that they say they hate, and we just go through it scientifically and like, oh, look, this is the form they followed. Hey, they're almost identical. They almost use the same song form, and yet you hate this one. Why? Why do you hate it? Did you really listen to it? Did you really give it a chance? Or did you just see that it was country, so you decided you hate it before you even listened to it? And now, look what's happened. Like the best-selling record or single of all times was a mesh between hip-hop and country.
Yeah,
so beautiful
Country
things
Road
can happen.
Old Town Road.
Old Town Road, yeah. So like they need extra plugs, right? They haven't streamed enough. But that magic and that beauty is possible now because the information is so open and people can be open, and the bias is less. There's still bias, but it's less. And I think a little bit of bias is healthy because it helps you identify who you are as a musician. You're not all things to all people. It's okay that you like what you like and you don't like what you don't like. That's normal. No one's going to love every single thing. That's okay to have some bias. But like I said, if you listen to a song you hate, listen to the song you hate. There's still probably some good stuff in there. It's if you're hearing it, it's successful. If you're hearing it, it's enough people have liked it that it's been brought up into our stratosphere of awareness. Enough thousands of people have already listened to it and approved. So you're hearing it. So there must be something good about it.
Yeah, something's working.
yeah, something, and in the Billboard 100, it's a great place to go just because even if you don't listen to those tracks are influencing everything that's happening below it. Some things that I do in my ambient music for the prayer garden, even that stuff, it's impacted by what the people at the top do. So it's just good to be aware of what's happening. I check those sites a couple of times a month just to stay current. As you get past the age of 20 and further away from 20, you don't know what's cool anymore. You're 40, so yeah, you're not cool anymore. So you need to know what's the cool thing and what's happening. And to do that, resources like Billboard are very, very useful.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think maybe a nice place to close out too.
Okay.
So,
All right.
where do you like to send people for your work? Is it worldmaestro.com? Is that the best place?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
worldmaestro.com is good. And
Yeah.
then if they're looking on Spotify or Apple, it's my name, Colin O'Donohoe.
Okay, nice. And yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
so
cool stuff. I really enjoyed watching a lot of the videos you perform with all different types of musicians. And
and the Pangean Orchestra is a 501c3, and we are always happy to get new fans. If people want to volunteer, if they want to learn more about the Pangean Orchestra, then go to thepangeanorchestra.com, and we would love, wherever you are in the country or the world, it's okay. We can work together. So that's also, if people are interested in what the World Orchestra is doing, go and check out the Pangean Orchestra. And like I said, we're newly, about a month now, a 501c3, which is awesome. And so, yes, between the Pangean Orchestra and then my personal project, the Prayer Garden, there's a lot of great stuff out there that they can check out. And worldmaestro.com is a great place to start. And I'm sure from there, there's links to the other stuff. And I'm just very grateful to you to let me on your show. I've enjoyed the shows you've done before, and I love the chance to talk music. So
yeah, thanks so much for sharing all that. I got a lot out of the conversation, and I think you bring up a lot of great fundamental points too of just how you can make the most out of your experience with music and learning and listening to other people and paying attention. I think it's key. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share all that with us. And your work is really fascinating and interesting. And I think it's bringing a lot of traditions to people that would never come across it otherwise. And that's
that's the
really,
goal.
really nice. That's a great
Awesome.
service.
Thanks.
So, all right.
All right.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. Hope you guys have a great day. Take care.